Right, we are going to do the last exercise of lecture 1, and that is where we teach you how to handle exceptions. Right, now the topic here is exception handling, and we need to talk about what it means. Now, an exception is an error from which your program cannot recover. You can also call it abnormal termination of the program, or you can just say your program crashed. And that is not what we want. We want that exception or that error to be handled in a structured way, such that you can still carry on. The programs can still run. Typical exceptions that can occur are that you want to read from a file, but the file that you try to open does not exist, or you want to divide by 0. But there are other exceptions as well. For example, you want to, the user want to enter something into a text box which is not a string, or anything like that can also be handled in this way. Now, to illustrate what I mean by this, I'm going to go to the file that we created. You remember the file that was created. We're going to delete it and then try to read from it to see what happens. So I've deleted it, and now we're going to run the program. Okay, I want to read from the file, but an exception is thrown. Okay, with other words, the program crashed and it says an unhandled exception occurred. All right. So what to do? Now, the way in which we handle exceptions is by using the blocks with keywords. We have the try, the catch, throw, catch, and finally. Now, we are going to focus only on try and catch. For every try block, you must have at least one catch block, but you are allowed to have more than one catch block. So what on earth am I talking about? Let's now look at it. You remember we had two parts where we write data to a file, and here we try to read data from the file. Now, what you put in your try block, nothing new, it's existing code, but it's the code that you suspect will cause the exception. To write data to a file is not going to a file that you create, is not going to cause an exception because you create the file. But to try to read data from a file that cannot be found, that will definitely create an exception. So what are we going to do is the following. We're going to insert the whole, all the text, all the code where we read data from the file inside a try block. So for a try block, we must have a catch block. Now what should be inside the catch block? The catch block must contain the code that handles the error. Most cases it's a message that will be displayed. Okay, so a catch block doesn't need to have an argument list, which makes it generic, but we are going to we're not going to use it in that way. We will, so you can see that IntelliSense shows us there's already something like this. It means there's already a subclass called file not found exception, which is part of the bigger class exception. So if that exception occurs, we want the following message to be shown, and that is file not found. Okay, but let's say there's some other code inside the try block that has nothing to do with a file not being found, but which also generates an exception. Then we are going to handle it in a different way, and that is we're going to create an object of the class exception called general exception. Okay, and we say if that happens, we want the following to happen. The message box dot show, and we want to say general exception Okay, so what this means is that that is an object that was declared of the class exception, and an object has methods associated with it. Classes and objects will be explained in due time in more detail. So now I can use the message method of this object. Okay, now let's run the program again and see what happens. Okay, I want to read from a file that does not exist. So let's see. I get the message file not found. Okay, that is what we want. In other words, the program didn't crash. It just gives me an error message. Okay. Right, but now we haven't even used the second catch block that we created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate the text file and then insert new code in the try block to create another kind of exception. So let me now run the program, and I'm going to add some data, and I'm going to say write to file. So now I have again a file that I want that I can read from. Okay. Now I go back to the try block. In other words, why did I do that? Is that I do not want this catch block to execute. Okay, because the way in which this works is if an unexpected error occurs in the try block, the code in the try block is stopped at the line that caused the problem, and then it looks for a matching exception handler. And if that is found, a control transfers to the first listed catch clause that can handle that type of execution. The catch clause statements are executed, and control then transfers to the finally block if you have one. Okay, so that's why I don't want this catch block to be executed. I want this one to be executed. That's why I made sure that the file is now there. Okay, but I'm going to add now new code to create an error, and the code that I create is the following. So I declare an integer, and then I do something that you know by now is not defined. Okay, now if I run the program now, this second catch block should execute. So let's see what happens. So if I say read from file, general exception attempted to divide by 0. So I didn't code these words. These words already exist. It's a message that's associated with the general exception object. Okay. Right, so let's go back to this one, file not found exception. You can also do the same as what you've done over here. In other words, you create an object and then you use the message method of that object. So what I do is, instead of file not found exception just like that, I declare now an object. So now I say the message is file not found, and now I'm going to use the message. Okay, now to be able to do this, I must first now go and delete that file again, to illustrate how it works now. Here it is, I delete it. Okay. And now I'm going to run the program. I'm trying to read from it. Remember, the file doesn't exist any longer. And now look at this. This is now the message that's displayed. File not found. I specified those words, but the rest is given by the message method. And that says that it cannot find that file.